By June 1940, Germany had achieved rapid victories across Western Europe. France had surrendered, Belgium and the Netherlands were occupied, and the Low Countries had fallen under Nazi control. Hitler's confidence in German dominance was at its peak. Inside the Reich, Hitler and his generals believed that Britain, increasingly isolated and dependent on imports, might seek terms to avoid the devastation experienced on the continent. Hitler's advisors, including Hermann Göring, Walther von Brauchitsch, and Franz Halder, drafted what would be called a final peace offer to Britain. This proposal was designed to secure German strategic goals without the need for a direct invasion of the British Isles. The offer included conditions that would require Britain to accept Nazi-dominated Europe, withdraw from continental alliances, and agree to limitations on its military operations. Hitler assumed that the offer, backed by the threat of invasion and the devastation of European neighbors, would compel submission. Within German high command, there was both confidence and impatience. Generals like Gerd von Rundstedt and Erhard Milch believed that Britain's military and logistical position was precarious. They expected Churchill, newly appointed prime minister in May 1940, to negotiate. Hitler insisted on urgency, calling for the proposal to be delivered before Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, could be executed. If they refuse, the fault will be theirs, Hitler asserted during a high-level meeting in early July. We have given them the opportunity for peace. They will rue it if they do not accept. On the British side, Churchill received reports of Germany's overtures. In his early days as prime minister, he recognized the offer as both a test and a trap. "We shall not negotiate with a regime built on conquest and oppression," Churchill stated in private memoranda. For him, the moral and strategic imperative was clear. Britain could not submit no matter the pressure. Churchill's advisors, including Anthony Eden and Lord Halifax, debated the ramifications, but the prime minister's resolve remained unwavering. German diplomats formally delivered the offer through channels in July 1940. The terms were calculated to appeal to pragmatic elements in Britain: cessation of hostilities in Europe, avoidance of a German invasion, and some economic concessions. Yet the underlying demand, that Britain acknowledge German dominance in Europe, was unacceptable. German generals expected at least a discussion, if not outright compliance, given the rapid collapse of France. Within the Reich, the response to anticipated British negotiations was measured but confident. Göring assured Hitler that Britain, facing isolation and the threat of invasion, would be compelled to compromise. Kesselring and other Luftwaffe leaders prepared to intensify bombing campaigns to underscore the consequences of refusal. Halder, however, cautiously noted in his diary, "Britain is not France. Their history, leadership, and resolve are formidable. Overconfidence could prove costly." In London, civilians observed increasing signs of German intimidation. Air raid sirens, blackout drills, and reports of bombings across the Channel heightened awareness of the threat. Yet public morale remained remarkably resilient. The Ministry of Information, under Lord Beaverbrook, disseminated messages emphasizing endurance, unity, and defiance. Civilian observers took courage from reports that the Luftwaffe had not yet achieved air superiority, and that the RAF continued to defend the skies effectively. On July 19, 1940, German diplomats delivered the final peace proposal directly to the British government through neutral channels. Churchill's reception was polite but firm. He refused to enter into negotiations, categorically rejecting any offer that compromised Britain's sovereignty or its alliances. "We shall not surrender," Churchill declared to his cabinet. "There is no compromise with tyranny. We will fight on the beaches, in the streets, and in the fields. Britain will stand." News of the refusal reached Berlin, where Hitler and his generals were stunned. Many in the high command could not comprehend the absolute rejection, given France's rapid surrender and Britain's precarious position. Officers such as Gerd von Rundstedt noted in private communications, "This is unexpected. Their resolve exceeds our expectations. Such defiance may require reevaluation of strategy." Hitler's reaction oscillated between disbelief and anger. In meetings at the Reich Chancellery, he demanded explanations for Britain's obstinacy. Göring attempted to reassure him, arguing that further bombing would bring compliance. Kesselring highlighted the Luftwaffe's operational limits and pilot fatigue. Halder cautioned against underestimating British tenacity, but Hitler's mood was volatile. "They will submit," he insisted. They must. Inside Germany, officers recorded private reflections on the implications of Churchill's refusal. Halder wrote in his diary, "It is apparent that Britain possesses a unique capacity for resistance. Their government, military, and civilians are aligned. This defiance is not temporary, it is deliberate and deeply rooted. Operation Sea Lion and our strategic assumptions must be reassessed. Meanwhile, British civilians continue to experience the Blitz. London and other industrial cities endured nightly bombing raids, yet citizens displayed remarkable resilience. Volunteers organized relief efforts, repaired damage, and maintained essential services. Children were evacuated to the countryside, yet the broader population remained engaged in the war effort. The refusal of Hitler's offer became a symbol of moral and national resolve, reinforcing the determination of both civilians and military personnel. German generals began internal discussions regarding the feasibility of invasion and continued bombing campaigns. Meetings were tense, reflecting the growing realization that Britain's defiance was strategic, not merely reactive. Halder emphasized the unprecedented nature of Britain's response. Never before have we faced a nation that, under direct threat, remains unified and resolute. This is not surrender. It is calculated resistance. By August 1940, German strategy shifted. While the offer had been formally refused, the expectation of compliance had been replaced with a recognition that Britain would continue fighting. Luftwaffe campaigns intensified over southern England, targeting airfields, ports, and industrial centers. Generals hoped to compel submission through attrition, yet reports consistently indicated that British resistance was effective, coordinated, and unbroken. British leadership, civilian population, and military personnel reinforced one another. Churchill's speeches, including the famous "We shall fight on the beaches," and "This was their finest hour" addresses, resonated deeply across the nation. Civilians maintained morale, volunteers assisted in relief and civil defense, and the RAF continued to challenge Luftwaffe operations. German generals were forced to acknowledge that the refusal was not an isolated act of obstinacy, but a reflection of national will. Inside Hitler's high command, the psychological impact of the rejection was profound. For the first time, the assumption that Germany could coerce Britain into submission was challenged. Strategic recalculations began, as generals debated the feasibility of invasion without guaranteed air superiority. Goering and Kesselring stressed the need for continued pressure, while Halder and von Rundstedt documented the unprecedented nature of Britain's refusal. By late 1940, the reality had become clear: Britain would fight. Operation Sea Lion remained unfeasible under existing conditions, and the High Command recognized that strategic bombing, threats, and diplomatic overtures had failed to break Churchill's resolve. Hitler's final offer, intended to secure compliance, had been categorically rejected, establishing a turning point in German strategic planning. Following Churchill's firm refusal, the atmosphere within Hitler's high command shifted from confident expectation to frustration and disbelief. Generals who had anticipated at least negotiations were stunned by the unyielding response. Hitler, initially incredulous, demanded explanations for Britain's obstinacy. Walther von Brauchitsch and Franz Halder presented data indicating that British resolve extended far beyond mere survival instinct. It was strategic, deliberate, and nationally unified. The final peace offer, designed to appeal to pragmatism and fear of destruction, had been wholly rejected. Hitler's expectation that Britain, isolated and facing overwhelming odds, would capitulate was shattered. Meetings in Berlin became tense, with generals debating next steps. Gerd von Rundstedt warned, "The assumption that Britain would submit voluntarily is mistaken. Their leadership and morale are exceptional. We must reassess Operation Sea Lion." Luftwaffe commanders, including Hermann Göring and Albert Kesselring, argued for intensification of bombing campaigns. They believed that continued pressure might compel Britain to reconsider. Yet reports from the field consistently showed that London, Coventry, and other cities remained resilient. Anti-aircraft defenses, civil defense volunteers, and coordinated response networks minimized casualties and damage, maintaining operational and civilian morale. The psychological impact on German leadership was profound. Hitler, frustrated by the refusal, alternated between rage and denial. Diaries from generals reflected astonishment. Halder noted, "Never have I witnessed a nation so resolved in the face of imminent threat. Their prime minister exemplifies courage and determination. Their people endure with discipline and resolve. Our calculations must be revisited." In London, Churchill used the refusal as a symbol of defiance. His speeches emphasized the unbreakable will of Britain, inspiring both civilians and military personnel. The Ministry of Information disseminated messages of resilience, encouraging volunteerism, unity, and repair of bombed infrastructure. The RAF, under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, continued to challenge Luftwaffe incursions, demonstrating that the refusal was supported not only by leadership but by operational capacity. German intelligence intercepted these developments, further unsettling the high command. Reports of civilian organization, continued industrial production, and rapid repair of infrastructure contradicted assumptions that terror bombing would achieve submission. Generals recorded private assessments noting that Britain's endurance had strategic implications, forcing reconsideration of invasion plans and resource allocation. By September 1940, the Blitz intensified, with nightly raids across London and industrial cities, yet civilian and military coordination remained effective. Air raid wardens, firefighters, volunteers, and the Home Guard mitigated damage while maintaining public morale. RAF squadrons intercepted bombers with increasing efficiency, illustrating the failure of intimidation as a tool to compel peace. In Berlin, tension between Hitler and his generals increased. Goering insisted on persistence, while Halder and von Rundstedt highlighted the limits of Luftwaffe operations and pilot fatigue. Kesselring warned. Even with continued bombing, the British are adapting. Their industrial and civil organization resists our pressure. The refusal to negotiate is not temporary, it is intentional and strategic. Hitler's confidence was shaken, but his determination to coerce Britain remained, creating friction within the high command. Civilians in Britain became an unexpected yet decisive factor. Stories of resilience, courage, and ingenuity were widely reported, reinforcing both national morale and military effectiveness. Factories repaired damaged equipment, volunteers maintained emergency services, and the public endured blackouts and rationing. These efforts highlighted to German observers that the refusal of the peace offer was backed by comprehensive societal determination. German generals documented that the strategic assumptions underlying the final peace offer were fundamentally flawed. Halder's diary reflected the growing realization: we assumed a nation would surrender under threat alone. Britain's leadership and civic organization defy this assumption. Operation Sea Lion is increasingly infeasible without recalculating all factors. As autumn 1940 progressed, Hitler's frustration intensified. Reports from the front, intelligence updates, and reconnaissance missions revealed that bombing had not broken the will of Britain. Luftwaffe losses were rising, while the RAF retained operational capacity. Generals cautioned against overextension, yet Hitler continued to demand pressure. Meetings became increasingly tense as officers balanced loyalty with honest appraisal of operational realities. Meanwhile, Churchill leveraged Britain's refusal to bolster domestic morale. Speeches, radio broadcasts, and propaganda emphasized unity, courage, and the moral imperative of resistance. Civilians responded with continued vigilance, volunteering, and participation in civil defense. Military and civilian resilience reinforced one another, demonstrating that the rejection of the peace offer was a coordinated and conscious act. By November 1940, German high command faced a stark reality: Britain would not capitulate. Strategic bombing campaigns, terror tactics, and diplomatic overtures had failed. Hitler's initial expectation of compliance, based on France's rapid surrender, proved incorrect. Generals began advocating for alternative strategies, including diversion of resources to other theaters and reconsideration of invasion plans. Within Berlin, the psychological effects of the refusal became increasingly evident. Hitler's mood fluctuated between anger, disbelief, and reluctant acknowledgement. Goering emphasized continued pressure, but generals like Halder and von Rundstedt stressed operational limits. Reports from intelligence indicated that the British public's endurance, combined with effective military defense, made further coercion unlikely to succeed. By December 1940, the German High Command had reached a tentative consensus. Britain would fight on, regardless of offers, threats, or bombings. Operation Sea Lion remained planned but increasingly uncertain. Hitler's final peace offer, intended to secure submission, had instead revealed the depth of Britain's resolve. Civilian endurance, leadership, and military coordination collectively undermined the assumption that negotiation could achieve compliance. By early 1941, the ramifications of Britain's categorical refusal became increasingly apparent within German high command. Hitler's confidence in coercion through diplomacy and intimidation had been shattered. Officers who had expected compliance were forced to confront a reality in which Britain, under Churchill's leadership, would continue to fight regardless of the threat posed by the Reich. Generals, including Franz Halder and Gerd von Rundstedt, began formal reassessment of strategic priorities. Diaries and meeting notes reflect the unprecedented nature of Britain's resilience. Never before has a nation faced with imminent invasion and relentless bombing maintained such cohesion and determination, Halder wrote. Our assumptions have failed and our resources are limited. Britain's refusal demands reevaluation of all plans. Luftwaffe commanders, including Hermann Göring and Albert Kesselring, sought to maintain offensive momentum. Bomber wings targeted London, Coventry, and industrial centers with escalating intensity. Yet civilian coordination and RAF defenses minimized operational impact. Anti-aircraft batteries, radar networks, and rapid repairs mitigated damage, demonstrating to German leadership that civilian endurance was as formidable as military resistance. Hitler oscillated between disbelief, rage, and strategic frustration. Meetings at the Reich Chancellery became increasingly tense. Generals documented that Hitler's initial insistence on Britain's submission had proven unrealistic. Göring argued for continued air pressure. Halder emphasized that logistical strain and pilot fatigue were creating limits. The refusal of the final peace offer had exposed the gap between German assumptions and operational reality. In London, Churchill continued to leverage the refusal as a symbol of national will. His speeches, including the now famous addresses in June and July 1940, inspired both civilians and military personnel. Public morale remained high despite nightly air raids. Volunteers repaired bombed streets, firefighters extinguished fires, and citizens participated in civil defense. The refusal of the offer became a unifying act, reinforcing Britain's strategic and moral position. German generals increasingly recognized that Operation Sea Lion could not proceed without substantial air superiority, a condition that, despite months of bombing, had not been achieved. Halder and von Rundstedt recommended focusing resources elsewhere, suggesting deployment to North Africa and planning for eventual campaigns against the Soviet Union. Hitler's insistence on coercion clashed with operational realities, creating tension within the high command. Intelligence reports underscored the impact of Britain's refusal. Civilians were actively supporting military operations, maintaining factories, repairing infrastructure, and volunteering in civil defense. RAF pilots, including Douglas Bader and Johnny Johnson, continued to defend the skies effectively. German generals were forced to acknowledge that the refusal was not symbolic, but operationally supported by the full spectrum of British society. By spring 1941, strategic recalculations solidified. Hitler's final peace offer had failed, and the Reich's high command accepted that Britain would continue to resist. Operation Sea Lion remained formally planned but increasingly impractical. Generals documented that terror, diplomacy, and military pressure had failed to compel surrender, marking a decisive turning point in the European conflict. The psychological effects on Hitler and his inner circle were profound. Diaries from Halder, Kesselring, and von Rundstedt describe disbelief at Britain's resolve. Halder wrote, "Their government, people, and armed forces function as one entity. Even under extreme duress, they maintain cohesion. We face a nation unbroken by fear, and our assumptions have been catastrophically flawed." As German strategic focus shifted to other theaters, Britain's refusal of the peace offer became a cornerstone of Allied resilience. Churchill's leadership, coupled with civilian and military determination, created a model of national defiance that would inspire resistance across occupied Europe. Generals documented that Britain's unyielding stance forced the Reich to divert resources and delay broader operations, fundamentally altering the trajectory of the war. By summer 1941, Hitler acknowledged, reluctantly, that coercion alone could not secure compliance. Generals emphasized the limits of continued air raids and the logistical strain on Germany's forces. Kesselring and Göring recognized that the RAF and British defenses remained operationally intact. Hitler's final peace offer, intended as a demonstration of German dominance, had instead revealed the nation's extraordinary resilience. Civilian efforts in Britain continued to reinforce military capacity. Volunteers repaired bombed buildings, ensured supply lines, and maintained essential services. Children, though evacuated, continued their education in safer regions. Industrial production recovered quickly after air raids. The population's endurance, combined with effective leadership, validated Churchill's refusal as both morally and strategically sound. German high command reconciled with the implications. Britain's categorical refusal demonstrated that victory through coercion and intimidation was impossible without extensive and protracted conflict. The psychological and operational realization shaped German planning for the remainder of the war. Officers recognized that the refusal had not only moral significance but strategic consequences. Germany could not secure quick dominance over the Western Front. In Berlin, Hitler's frustration persisted, yet the operational reality was undeniable. Diaries and meeting records reflect that generals advised caution, emphasizing that attempts to force Britain's submission would result in significant losses without guaranteed success. Halder concluded, Britain's resolve, leadership, and civil organization have fundamentally changed our calculations. Their refusal of our offer ensures continued resistance, shaping the course of this conflict. By late 1941, the consequences of the refusal were evident. Germany redirected resources to the Eastern Front and North African campaigns, acknowledging that Operation Sea Lion was no longer immediately feasible. Britain's steadfast stance had forced a strategic pause, enabling continued coordination with the Allies and the eventual opening of additional fronts. Churchill's refusal had transformed a diplomatic rejection into a decisive factor in the global conflict. The moral and operational implications were profound. The refusal demonstrated that national unity, civilian resilience, and determined leadership could counter threats of coercion and occupation. German High Command had to acknowledge that assumptions of compliance based on intimidation were flawed. Britain, under Churchill's guidance, remained unbroken and strategically capable of sustaining long-term resistance. The refusal of Hitler's final peace offer marked a defining moment in WWII. Civilian and military resilience, coupled with effective leadership, preserved British sovereignty and morale. Generals within the Reich documented the unprecedented nature of this defiance, recognizing its operational and psychological consequences. Hitler's assumption of inevitable compliance had been decisively refuted.